Billions of dollars are being sent as remittances to African states. These are monies being sent by relatives in the African diaspora to help family and friends at home. Nigeria and Egypt are two African countries in the top 10 recipients of remittances, with a figure of 21 billion and 18 billion respectively. And some people say that Somaliland could not function without her diaspora. The so-called Arab Spring dramatically demonstrated how social media platforms and Africa's mobile phone market can impact political evolution. This week, Africa Today focuses on the economic, political and cultural impact of the diaspora, asking if it's Africa's most underused human resource.
The African Union defines its diaspora as people of African origin living outside the continent, irrespective of their citizenship and nationality, and who are willing to contribute to the development of the continent. It also declares that it will invite and encourage the full participation of the African diaspora. The problem is there are at least 3 diasporas, each with varying degrees of commitment to Africa. The first are the descendants of millions of enslaved Africans who experienced the horrors of the Middle Passage. The second consists of Africans who migrated from the 1950s onwards, mainly to Europe and North America. And the third are the offspring of that post-independence generation who have grown up in the West. Every year, the diaspora makes a crucial contribution to the continent through remittances, which are actually worth more than foreign direct investment and development aid from donor governments. Some African leaders have recognised the political, social and economic impact of their people overseas, with 25 states making it possible for citizens abroad to vote in elections back home. But many activists want more, calling for coordinated action on issues like visas and tax breaks for returnees. This week, Africa Today looks at what is being done to bridge the gap between Africa and her diaspora.
I'm Vuiswang Ngobongwana, welcoming you to Africa Today. Indeed, much has been written about the brain drain, so-called, of educated Africans seeking a better life abroad due to some kind of post-colonial turmoil in their home countries. War, refugee crises, poverty, a lack of medical care and educational opportunities are strong factors in making people leave their beloved homelands. This has created a huge and largely uncoordinated human resource that Africans are seeking to use for the benefit of the continent. But the question is how? And here to share their thoughts are Francis Mensah Williams, who's the editor of Reconnect Africa, Paul Obina, who's a cultural historian, and on Skype we have Elvina Quaison, who's the director of Silk Solutions right there in Accra in Ghana. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
If I could start with you, Francis Mensah Williams, of those 3 descriptions of what the diaspora is, where would you fit in?
Let me not go for the ancient diasporans because I would say probably that the post-colonial wave,
Yes.
the Africans that came to the West for education, for economic opportunities, I'm definitely sort of the offspring of that category.
So what's inspiring you to become involved more actively in the development of your own continent?
Well, I have to say that for me, it was very clear that even though we were not living in Ghana, which is my country of origin, I am still a Ghanaian, and I had, parents who were very insistent that I remember that. So, we speak the language at home, and we were making constant visits back. So that level of connectivity was always there. So I think that's made it very clear to me that no matter where I'm residing as a primary residence, I am an African, I am a Ghanaian, and that's where I constantly look to in terms of what I do.
And what about yourself, Paul? I mean, where do you define yourself in any particular way, where, as far as diasporian or not is concerned?
I wouldn't call myself a diasporan, but I'm very fiercely proud of my heritage. And even though I was not born knowing it or raised by it, I've married back into it. So I'm married. My wife is from Igbo land. My father's an Igbo. And I've made links back there now. And
yes.
so I'm very strongly proud of that.
And also, have you actually been back to Nigeria to get a feel of the culture firsthand many times?
Of course, yes. I first arrived in Ghana. I went to Ghana first.
Yes.
They say sometimes a little bit more mellow than hitting Nigeria first. But yeah, I've been back several times, or many times now.
And let's go onto the line there on Skype. We have Elvina Quaison, who's actually in Ghana and made the leap, and some would say courageous leap, to try and make a life there, giving back something to the country of her origin. Elvina, can you hear us?
I can, yes.
Hi, Elvina. What inspired you to do that?
Well, I come from a social sciences background, and I decided to go and spend a year after I'd finished my first degree in Ghana, and I loved it. Went back to the UK to finish my studies with the aim to go straight back, and it took another 12 years, but I finally made it back.
And how did you find it when you made that move? Did you get a lot of assistance? Did you do it on your own? How did it work?
I took a bold or slightly not the most wise decision to start a business straight away, but I had a lot of support, both from friends and family who'd already made the move or lived in Ghana already, and from those in the UK, Francis being one of them. And it's key. You really do need a lot of support and assistance, because as much as some will feel that they're going home, it's not the home that you may have imagined. It's a country that's been doing its thing and creating its cultures that are not exactly as you experience when you're living in the diaspora.
Okay, thank you so much. If I could ask you, Francis, one of the complaints of people in Africa is that Africans, people of African origin coming from the diaspora, come there with a certain attitude that rubs their backs the wrong way, i.e. a superior attitude. What are your thoughts on that, and what advice would you give?
I think that's probably very fair. I moved back to live in Ghana for several years, and I was working there. And, you know, in the position that I had, I used to meet a number of people who were coming on holiday, interested in perhaps coming to work in Ghana.
Yes.
And I would say very frequently the attitude was very much about, oh, but of course you would want me. I've been educated abroad. You know, I'm very special. And you have to really, and I do a lot of career coaching, and also through what we write on Reconnect Africa, people have to understand that you're not really much used to a corporation until you understand how things work in a country. So if, as in my case, I was hired to work for a bank there, you know, you go first, you listen, you understand before you start to offer suggestions, because otherwise you do antagonize people, and you are never the first person returning from having been educated abroad. So to assume everybody else is the native waiting for you, I think is very ill-advised. But it's true, I think some people do come back very misinformed in their attitude.
And this brings us back to the concept of the idea of Africa, as some people would consider it. You know, for example, talking about Nigerians, you know, a lot of them do feel much more positive about Africa as a whole than they do about their own particular country.
I think this is a legacy of colonialism. It's the actual functions of the state. And as soon as you hear about Nigeria, the word corruption generally can come following too close behind. But it's as though there's nowhere else on the planet that would be corrupt. So I think these stereotypes, these are things that we really do have to explore. We have to break them. We have to look at issues of honesty. I always remember Kwame Nkrumah, who said, we're doing much to revive our culture, but if the revival is to endure, it must be based on strong moral and spiritual foundations. And our moral and spiritual progress should not lag behind the progress we're making in the economic field. So there's this drive to... I think what it is, we sometimes set very, very high standards for ourselves.
Yes.
And then we see the exposure of things not measuring up.
Right.
And this can put many young people down and don't want to identify with Africa. So I've met many people, as I've been going to, they've been coming away from.
Right, right.
And so, and for myself, of course, being a mixed parentage, you know, I'm on your child, I'm a white man there, or Bruni. So, of course, when I go there, of course, I'm interpreted a totally different way.
Right, right.
But culturally, it's like I say, the information, the knowledge of and what we perceive Africa to be is a very important, an important point to have.
Let me bring you in on that, Elvina. I mean, your concept of the idea of Africa, was it just linked very much to do with your own family links, or was there some political agenda in your mind in terms of really making a strong point about African self-determination?
I think there definitely was an element of wanting to go and contribute to the progression of Africa as a whole, and Ghana particularly, particularly from the organisations I was connected to in the UK, and just seeing how people viewed Africa and how this was playing out in very different ways from what I actually saw when I visited Ghana or Uganda or anywhere, and I could see that people were moving forward, making things happen. And this was not what I would see when I'm back in the UK and watching television and only hearing one side, as Mr. Obina was saying, about corruption and lack of progression and so on.
Absolutely. So if I could just ask you about the conditions you faced. For example, I mean, there are many African presidents calling for the diaspora to come home and help. And Morgan Tsvangirai of Zimbabwe made that call famously a couple of years ago and was laughed at because a lot of the Africans in the diaspora, Zimbabweans, said, "I'm sorry, but the country is not ready." How did you find Ghana?
I think it's a combination, and funny enough, there is strong discussions going on within the diasporan community in Ghana, because currently we're experiencing infrastructural issues, especially with lights off, i.e. power outs and lack of water and so on. Yeah. So though there is a strong call for the diaspora to return, there's also the argument from the diaspora's point of view as it would be hard for us to return when the infrastructural necessities aren't in place. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a strong interest. One of the things that I do with my company is workshops on preparing to move to Ghana, just to help others prepare themselves for the things that I and others have had to go through or experience, that you wouldn't even think about, that you have to start to get your head around. As you mentioned, the superiority, the ideas of being superior in some way because you're educated abroad. And this is almost something that you're socialized into, because to all intents and purposes, we too were socialized by Western views of Africa. So you will have an idea that everybody is less than or is struggling or needs your Western help. Yes. Until you get here and you experience for yourself that actually there is a great deal going on, and you need to sit back, as Francis said, observe, and then begin to try and participate. And also,
just very briefly from you, Francis, if I could ask you about that cultural preparation and sensitivity, because it's very insulting to go, because a lot of people make insults without even being aware they've made an insult. So what advice would you give so that they don't become discouraged?
You know, I think sometimes people underestimate how easy it is to forget what a culture is like, because there are people here who have lived in their home countries, but they've been over here for a few years, and they don't actually realize how they have changed in the way they perceive things. So when they go home and they're faced with what they were used to dealing with, they see it in a very different way. And I think sometimes people really need to be aware before they start to make that move back. Right. That change is change. It's not just moving back to what I knew or what I think is home. Right. It's change, because it didn't stand still while you were away. Of course. And there is so much going on. And it's about really being conscious that you're going to face challenges. Okay. And we definitely, you know, Reconnect Africa was set up as an online platform to connect Africans in the diaspora with the reality of Africa at home and what that means, particularly from a professional perspective. Okay. And it's critical, because the businesses need our skills, but they don't need bad attitudes. Absolutely. They can do without that. And they certainly don't have it from Elvina. Elvina, thank you so much for your contribution. It's been really, really encouraging and quite inspiring to see you enthused and looking so bright and warm over there while we freeze. Thank you for joining us.
And if we could move on, we're going to hear what you think, talking about using the media and educating yourself. We've had a lot of feedback on our Facebook fan page, which is now over 6,000 people. Thank you so much for supporting us. And our first comment is from Wonkemi, Queen of Zamunda, no less. And Wonkemi says, dual citizenship should definitely be given to members of the diaspora after they do some sort of community service or take some sort of course or something along those lines. Africa gets billions every year from members of the diaspora sending money home to relatives and in aid to charities. And we have another comment from Ahmed Abdi, and Ahmed is just full of praise. Ahmed says, the African diaspora are making a difference with the help of my favorite television station, Press TV, especially Africa Today, which highlights the changing fortune and promising development ahead for Africa, despite those artificial borders. Thank you, Ahmed, for your comments. Another comment from Daniel Ewens, who really gets to the point with governments when he says, African governments must speak out when black people suffer racism around the world. For the black Libyans who are suffering, for Trayvon Martin and for Stephen Lawrence. For far too long, their tongues have been silent. Arab nations speak out when they feel their people are suffering overseas. And a final comment from an Eritrean with a very organized diasporian community. Bez Solomon says, one thing is for sure, the diaspora is an indomitable force as long as it is organized. I speak from the Eritrean diaspora that has been organized. Women, professionals, youth and the like, since the days for liberation struggle and after independence. But is it only going to be a political struggle that inspires people? Do let us know what you think, and here's how you can do it.
Keep your thoughts coming in. Email africa@presstv.co.uk or text us on +44 78 00 00 8086. Or you can go to our Facebook fan page, Africa Today, Press TV, London.
And talking about making the most of the media, we're now joined on the phone by Dr. Ola Ogunyemi, who's the principal lecturer at the Lincoln School of Journalism. Dr. Ola, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Can you hear me well?
Absolutely, crystal clear.
Good.
And I really would love to hear your perspective about this exciting potential within the media. We talked about the so-called Arab Spring and how a lot of newspaper journalism was actually behind what was going on in social media. How do you see the use of the media towards progressing Africa's future and her link with the diaspora?
Well, in a positive way. Actually, there is a gulf between African ruling elites and the people in the diaspora. And the way to find a solution to that is to have a communication, free flow of communication between the two parties. Mm-hmm. And, the media should be seen, as a bridge, in that kind of, nexus. So the African government need to actually put that into their policy in a way in which they can articulate issues and projects that they want the people in the diaspora to be involved in, so that they can actually explain this, succinctly to us, and
Yes.
then people can now see ways in which they can engage. Because I know many people in the diaspora who are desperate to do something back home, but they don't know where to start from. According to the WHO, there are 400,000 Nigerian trained doctors, not overseas trained, Nigerian trained doctors in the diaspora. Mm-hmm. Can you just imagine? And these people, some of them have got skills that they can use back home, even when they have holiday, or they can take leave and things like that.
Yes.
Come home and then impart this. But we are, they are not being engaged with, and the media is the way to do.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Ola Ogunyemi. Sorry. Paul, what are your thoughts when you hear those kind of comments? People desperate to get involved, not knowing how to do it. What would you suggest as a cultural historian?
I'd always say about the term awareness is very, very important, and the fact that we concentrate very much on the recent history the confusions that have gone on. And we don't tend to, I use an acronym. I always say that Africa's caught in a trap. It stands for tribe, religion, and politics. And what happens is that the confusion that's kind of got hold of the mass population. We're talking a continent of 11.9 million square miles, after all. We talk about, for instance, African Americans, but then we talk about Irish Americans, Chinese Americans. They're specifically to a country. But the identity is very much generally based amongst the African population internationally.
And some historians would argue that's part and parcel of the legacy of the divide and rule that was deliberately created by the colonialists so that we do not organize and see ourselves as one people suffering under the same conditions. Well,
I think this is important to what Francis is doing, is that if it's like having it's like we've got a plug without a socket.
Yeah.
We need to connect back specifically, and I think Africa has to be ready for that. And the governments need to be getting those sockets ready, because that's a power source. We need to really connect back and then be recruiting. There are people on the ground. In fact, a young guy I'm coaching in boxing, I said to him last night, because I knew I was coming on here, and I said, what makes you so fiercely proud of being Nigerian? And he's very, very proud. And he just said to me, I don't know. I just am.
Wow.
And this is a 20-year-old. So I just said, okay, sometimes you can't define it. So there's a group of there are young Africans coming through who are fiercely proud of their heritage and their roots, even though at one time they may have been denying it.
Yes.
But now it's coming through because there is a movement there. And I think it's social media. I think it can be the music. It can be the films, it can be these things, just raising the esteem and identity.
Talking of Nigeria, I mean, Nollywood, huge media industry, billions of dollars, but this pressurizing of government. We mentioned earlier on in the show that 25 African countries allow their diasporian citizens to vote. How can we pressurize more and speak more with one voice to kind of keep that interaction going?
Well, the usual language is that gets anyone's attention is money.
Yes.
It's all about the money.
Yeah.
Look, you spoke at the beginning.
What about the African Union? They have access to money.
The other thing I would say, if I'm going to be really general about the African continent, is, you need to navigate government, not look to government to provide the solutions.
Really?
We, in the diaspora, and you mentioned this at the beginning of the show, billions are sent back. Unfortunately, it's not always a very coordinated sending. It tends to go to individual families. It's spent on particular needs, from healthcare to education to starting small businesses within those individual communities. There have been so many attempts to try and find some kind of overarching structure to use remittances so that they have a political impact in a way which then starts to say, look, you need to listen to the people who are supplying this money. If people are not accountable to the people who are supplying this money because the money is not organized, it's very difficult to then talk about political power.
Well, okay, let me just give the final word to our phone guest, Dr. Ola Ogunyemi. What are your final thoughts? We literally have about half a minute as you summarize what we're discussing today. The use of the media, are you optimistic? Do you see it going forward?
I am very optimistic. Actually, the African government should actually re-energize their efforts in setting up websites that provide information, about what is happening, generally in terms of economic issues, political...
Dr. Ola, it is with deep regret that I have to actually cut you off because that is all the time we have. Thanks to all of you who've been sending comments to us. Do continue to email africa@presstv.co.uk or text +4478 0000 8086. A huge thanks to today's guests, Francis Mensah Williams, Paul Obina, Elvina Quaison, and Dr. Ola Ogunyemi. Join us again next week for another edition of Africa Today. But until then, from me, Vuiswang Ngobongwana, on behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching.